anyway, I am Kelly Keene. I am one of the school counselors at Tappan Zee High School. Welcome to Financial Aid Night, one of the more exciting nights that we do at Tappan Zee. I know you're all probably thrilled to start learning about financial aid. We do recognize that this can be a very stressful
Zoom on
time.
this? It's a Zoom thing. Zoom. We gotta do it again.
Oh, probably everybody. Yeah. We do recognize that this is a really stressful time for everyone. And although we are certainly here to support you through this process, we don't claim to be experts by any means. So that's why we actually did bring an expert in tonight. So I'm not going to say much more. I want to introduce my team with me, the other counselors at the high school. We have Miss Rivera. We have Miss Marks. We have Mr. Altman, and we have Miss Holzer. Miss Holzer is going to introduce our speaker in 1 second. I just want to go over a few administrative things. If you have any questions, which is probably more of the bulk of this meeting, to be quite honest, you can put them in the chat at the bottom, and then we will get to the questions towards the end of the programming. Okay, so without further ado, I know it can sometimes be a long and lengthy process. I'm going to pass this over to Ms. Holzer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for an important conversation. We have tonight with us Stacy Salinas. She's the Director of Financial Aid at Dominican College. Stacy started her career in financial aid in 2002 as a financial aid counselor and has since gone on to work at both the state and private college levels. She's committed to helping students and families navigate the financial aid process. She's also a mom to 3 young children ranging from ages 10 to 5 years old. Stacy graduated from Hofstra University with a bachelor's in psychology, and she's working towards her master's degree in counseling at Fordham University. We are really lucky to have Stacy here with us tonight. We thank her so much for spending her time with us and sharing her expert advice with us. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Salinas.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out. As Jamie and Kelly had mentioned, tonight we're going to talk about the financial aid process and really talk about the importance of applying early. I'm going to give you a bunch of tips about the process, some food for thoughts. I always like to mention that I've been in the industry 18 years, and I like to consider myself a financial aid expert. However, we all know the regulations on the federal level are constantly changing. So with that, any questions that may arise that I don't have an answer to, I'd be more than happy to follow up and research and get the correct information for you. So let's get started. Tonight, we're going to talk about dollars and cents and how to actually finance your college education. We're going to talk about planning for 4 years, how extremely important it is to begin the process early, and how to actually apply for aid. Just some financial facts about Dominican College. 100% of our students receive some form of a grant or scholarship. We administer more than $30 million in grants, scholarships, and loans annually, and our counselors are available to help families calculate the true out-of-pocket expense. Tonight, we're going to talk about the FAFSA application. We're going to discuss some scholarship search engines. We're going to talk about loans, and we're going to talk about applying annually to each application that we talk about tonight. I like to refer to the saying, FAFSA is the key that opens the door really to any and all financial aid. So besides being the dreaded word, what is it? FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And notice how that word is in caps and bolded. It's important for everyone to understand the FAFSA is completely free. I can't tell you how many times throughout the years I've come in contact with families that have paid hundreds of dollars to certain firms that are going to help them do this process, or FAFSA.com because they're going to the wrong search engine and they're paying. So I always like to just emphasize the fact that this application is completely free. So this form is the form that the federal government uses to determine eligibility for federal aid, including grants, scholarships, work study, and loans. Who is actually eligible to apply for the FAFSA? The student, and only the student, must be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. The student must have a valid Social Security number. They must be enrolled and accepted in a degree-granting program at an institution. They must maintain what's known as satisfactory academic progress within that college or university. And they must have obtained a high school diploma, a GED, or have been homeschooled in a setting approved under state law. How does all this work? So all the information that is collected on this FAFSA application, the feds then determine what's known as a student's EFC. It's called the expected family contribution. And the EFC is the amount of money you and or your parents can be expected to contribute towards college costs. The EFC figure, which the feds calculate, takes the size of the family, the number in college, parent and student income, as well as assets into consideration. Like many other institutions, Dominican College will then try to meet what's called a student's need through a financial aid package, which can include funds from the federal government, the state of New York, or the college itself. So I'm a very visual person. I like to post this equation. Many institutions take what's called the cost of attendance or the cost of education, the direct cost. So if the student is commuting or if they're also residing, they take that top number and they deduct that EFC. Again, that EFC is the number that we're receiving once the FAFSA is filed. That difference is what is known as a student's demonstrated need. A couple of tips with filing the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is available October 1st of each year. Today is actually the first day that the 21-22 FAFSA application is available. Each institution has their own specific school code. So depending on what institutions are listed on the FAFSA, they're identified by their school code and then filtered out to those colleges and universities like that. The FAFSAs can be completed on the web by visiting fafsa.gov. And again, that's the appropriate website that you should all be going to. It's important to know that students and parents must each obtain their own what's called FSA ID and password. So it's your federal student aid ID and a password, which serves as your electronic signature for this FAFSA application. So a number of you that are listening in may have gone through this process with another child maybe years ago, or maybe even went through this process on their own years ago. And a PIN number may ring a bell. About 4 years ago, the feds have switched over from PIN numbers. So those PIN numbers are now null and void, and every student and parent that's filing the FAFSA must complete their own FSA ID and password. They must have their own. And it really, they took it a step further as far as identity theft is concerned. So that's why those PIN numbers are no longer valid. So another tip when filing, about 4 years ago, the feds changed the process, and now families are going to be reporting on prior year income. So for example, any seniors in high school that will be filing the 21-22 FAFSA, the feds are going to be looking to the 2019 tax year for the data. I have here that it's best to link directly to what's called the IRS data retrieval tool directly from the FAFSA. And as I proceed further into the presentation, I have some screenshots to kind of put it in a visual for you all. You always want to use the name listed on your Social Security card. The Department of Ed performs what's called a data match with the Social Security Administration Office. If you're not required to file a tax return, you are still required to report any and all income received to financially support yourself in that given tax year. If a student is living with both biological parents in the same household, but those parents are not married, both parents' income is required on the FAFSA. If a parent is divorced or separated, only the custodial parent's income is required. So definition of a custodial parent is typically the parent in which the student is residing with. The feds define custodial parent as the parent that's providing 51% support or more to that student, to that child. If the custodial parent is remarried, the step parent's income must also be provided. You never want to submit your tax return or W-2 form with the FAFSA application. If you're randomly selected by the feds for a process known as verification, the various financial aid offices will request documents at a later time. If you are residing with a legal guardian, do not report that person's income on the FAFSA. Again, in all the years I've been doing this, there's always somebody I come in contact with that's maybe grandma is their legal guardian, and grandma's info gets listed as a parent on the FAFSA. That should never be. There are dependency questions that specifically ask, are you residing with a legal guardian, or are you in legal guardianship? Should you answer yes to that question, the parental information gets completely grayed out and nothing more is asked about the parents. The only thing that may happen, depending on what colleges it's sent to, every institution has their own practice. But if you do answer yes to that question, some schools may follow up just requesting some kind of documentation stating the legal guardianship. You always want to submit the FAFSA whether or not you think you qualify for aid. Again, it's a free application. And as I get deeper into the presentation, you'll understand how institutions use the data from there to determine eligibility for additional institutional aid that may be available. You always want to read what's called the Student Aid Report, and it's known as the SAR carefully. The SAR is the official record that the feds have received and processed the FAFSA application. If anything is missing on the application, for example, if mom or dad or the student did not electronically sign the FAFSA, the feds will not determine that estimated family contribution, that EFC number. So aid will not be determined until those corrections are submitted to the aid center. Each FAFSA transaction allows for 10 schools to be listed. If students are applying to over 10 schools, once that SAR, that student aid report, is received, you would then go back into the FAFSA and make what's called a correction. So you make a correction, you would delete some schools and add whatever additional schools that you would like. And it's important to know that any correction that is made does require another electronic signature by both the parent and the student. Again, being very visual, I just put a screenshot for those that have not been through this process at all. This is what the appropriate website looks like. And it asks for student info, and these are the key identifiers as you're logging in. I mentioned earlier about the IRS data retrieval. Linking to this is quick and easy, and it saves the student and or parent from possibly having to get what's called a federal tax return transcript. So if they're randomly selected, as I mentioned, for that process known as verification, what that means is the institutions are then required to request tax return transcript info or tax returns for that given tax year, and basically verify what was filed on the FAFSA is true to that as what is listed on the tax returns. So if you see in the middle of the screen, there is, or 3/4 of the way down, there's a blue button that says link to the IRS. This would immediately remove you from the FAFSA website, which you're currently in here, and take you into the IRS website. It'll ask for some key identifiers, such as what was the address that you filed your taxes with. Once they identify you that way, they pull that tax data and drop it into the appropriate places in the FAFSA. It is a really, if you're eligible to do this, it's a really nifty tool, and it saves a lot of time, and it's less room for error. There's always a but. Some families may not be eligible to use this tool, and some examples include if an amended tax return was filed for that given tax year, if there was no social security number entered on the tax returns, or if a student or parent filed their taxes as married but filing separately, that tool would not be available. And that's okay. It just means that you'd have to line by line follow your tax returns and answer the appropriate questions, basically by inputting it in directly to the FAFSA website. This is what the confirmation page looks like. And I'm just gonna bring all of your attention to this orange button here. And it's very hard to read, but it does say, start your state application. We're gonna discuss all the different forms of financial aid, the state aid being one of them. This is where you would directly link to that application. And I pointed out because parents will fly by this and just submit the application and the FAFSA. There is a way to get into the state site if you do fly past this, but the benefit of linking directly from here is very similar to that of the IRS tool. You can actually, a lot of the data that's already entered in here will then get dropped into the state website. Just a quick visual of what the processing results look like. So a FAFSA is filed, the results are then sent to the schools that are listed. The school will review that FAFSA information, and then they'll make what's called award offers or send out financial aid award packages. We're going to get into the 4 forms of financial aid. There are grants, which are free money. These are based on need. Scholarships, which is free money. These are typically based on merit. There's work study, which is a student employment opportunity. And again, this is based on a student's demonstrated need. And then there are loans, which is money borrowed. The different resources that all of these forms of aid are funded by are the federal government, the state of New York, the college and universities themselves, or any private entity that supports tuition, such as the PTSA. So quickly getting into federal aid, these are grants through the federal government. Again, grants are, these are need-based, and grants do not get repaid back. There's what's called the Pell Grant. The federal Pell Grant is designed for students with exceptional demonstrated need. The current maximum award is $6,345. And this amount awarded is based on, again, that EFC, so that figure that the feds are delivering to each institution once you file your application, your FAFSA, and the student's enrollment status. And then another federal grant is what's known as SEOG. This, again, is designed for students with exceptional need, but notice how I listed and bolded, this fund is limited. What happens is the feds will give what I like to define as different pots of money across the board to each individual institution. So it's going to vary institution by institution. But once that pot of money is done, there's no more. This is why it's important to start the process early. You always want to try and get in the packaging cycle as early as possible. Because again, from my experience, I've worked at various institutions, both state and private. This typically is awarded out on a first come, first served basis. Additional federal aid, there's work study. This is also awarded based on a student's demonstrated need. This does not get repaid back. So the money is earned through a job on or off campus while the student's enrolled in school. Not only does it prepare the student for the real world, it actually helps them make a connection with the institution. And I always speak highly of this program, and I always like to kind of share my experience with you all. I have 3 young children, but I always say my work study students are an extension of my family. So we're there to help guide them not only through the aid process, just general life in general. So as a resident, as a student that's living on campus, they have an easier way to make a connection with the institution. A lot of commuters, I find this benefits them big time in making a connection. But it's important to know this fund is also limited. So what happens is the student, this will never get deducted from a tuition bill. It's important that you all understand that. The student will work a number of hours and they'll get a biweekly paycheck. So it's really up to the student's discretion what they're doing with this work study money that they're earning. Again, a lot of families will come to me and say, my son or daughter is starting as a freshman. I really want them to focus on their studies. I don't want them working. My answer to that is they cannot interfere, work cannot interfere with their class schedules. The federal government has put a 10-hour limit per week at any institution, so they cannot exceed 10 hours each week. Our students typically, we set them up for 5 to 6 hours per week, but as I stress, it does make the connection at that institution, but it's important to know that, again, with my experience, there are institutions that will award this freshman year, and if a student should decline this freshman year, it's going to be very slim to null that this award will be re-awarded sophomore, junior, and senior year. So that's kind of a food for thought. Additional federal aid, these are direct loans. These are in the student's name. These are loans, so they must be repaid back. These loans are backed by the federal government. The biggest difference between the two is subsidized is exactly what it's saying. The U.S. Department of Ed is subsidizing. They're paying the interest while the student is in school. Both of these loans require students to be at least half-time status, so they must be enrolled each semester at least 6 credits. It's important to know that the interest rate is set every July 1st of that preceding year. So as of July 1, 2020, the interest rate was fixed at 2.75. As a result of COVID, they have put this to a 0%. It was until September 30th, and we're still preciously waiting on what the new rates are, if they're reverting back to 2.75 for this current year, or if they're keeping them at 0% given the climate that we're in. Repayment for both of these loans begin after six months after graduation, or 6 months after a student drops below half-time status, whichever happens first. The standard repayment term on these loans is 10 years, but it could be extrapolated out for 30 years. It's important to know that annual loan limits apply. So here is a chart that will show you. A freshman will receive, it does not matter at what institution they attend, they are eligible for a total of $5,500 in direct loans. As a student moves up in their defined class level, according to however many earned credits they have, so does their loan eligibility. Another federal loan is the Parent Plus loan. Again, it's a loan, it must be repaid. This is available to parents of dependent students only, and it does require the parent to basically be creditworthy and get approved for this loan. Repayment begins immediately. So once the loan is fully dispersed at the institution, parents can expect to get a monthly statement from the servicer of this loan indicating repayment. It can all be deferred upon request with that servicer, but it's important to know that that does begin immediately. If a parent is credit denied, that does entitle a student to an additional unsubsidized loan for that given academic year. Now we're going to get into state aid, grants and scholarships. So grants and scholarships, as I mentioned earlier, they do not get repaid back. This is free money. So there's a program by the state of New York known as TAP. It's really referred to as the Tuition Assistance Program. This does require parents of students to be a New York resident for at least 12 consecutive months prior to the start of the semester. The student must be enrolled at an institution at least 12 credits. They must be full-time, and they must complete that state application. As I brought your attention to, you can link directly to it from the FAFSA, or you can go directly to the state website, which is tapweb.org, and complete that application. This application it must be renewed annually, and eligibility is every year, but it's based on annual completion of the application and, again, continued eligibility. The highest award amount for this is $5,165 for the academic year. Some additional state aid. Those of you that have been savvy in the news over the past few years may have heard of free tuition. I know Cuomo was pushing free tuition. It's known as the Excelsior Scholarship. The Excelsior Scholarship is for a student pursuing an undergrad degree at a SUNY or a CUNY. They must be and stay on track for on-time completion. So they must graduate within 4 years. They must earn 30 credits in a given year and receive a passing grade for each one of those credits. The maximum award for this grant is $5,500. But what's important to know is that if a student is receiving the state grant, the TAP grant, say I'm getting $3,000 in TAP, it's the difference of the two. That's what I'm going to net in the Excelsior Scholarship. So the starting number for this is $5,500. I'm getting $3,000 in TAP, so I'm netting $2,500 additional in this Excelsior Scholarship. A super important part of all this is the student is required to sign a contract agreeing to both residing in the state of New York and being employed in the state of New York for the number of years they receive this award post-graduation. So following up with an example, I'm a freshman, I'm attending, say, SUNY Binghamton. I received the Excelsior Scholarship freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, all 4 years. I've signed my contract. I stated I promised to reside in New York and I promised to be employed in New York. We all know, given the South Orangetown area, Bergen County is right there. I'm offered my dream job in Bergen County. I decide to take it. I'm now going to be required to pay back that Excelsior Scholarship because now it reverts to a loan. So I negated a part of that contract that I signed. So though that scholarship reverts to a loan, but it's at a 0% interest rate. This requires a family adjusted gross income for that tax year to fall at $125,000 or below to be eligible. So following in the same or similar footsteps is what's known as ETA, or the Enhanced Tuition Award. There are two key differences with this award. This is strictly for private colleges, such as Dominican College. The private college has to sign an agreement with the state indicating that they are enrolling in this program. So Dominican is one of the many privates that have enrolled in this program. The other key difference here is the starting number is $6,000. All the other requirements are the same. If I'm receiving $1,000 in my TAP award, I'm netting $5,000 in this state ETA award, which half gets paid by the state and the other half gets paid by the college itself. Again, the contract requirement, it's the same thing. Now I'm going to talk about institutional scholarships, and it's important to know that these ranges are going to differ institution by institution. So our merit-based scholarships, so this has nothing to do with filing a FAFSA. This just means I'm applying to Dominican College. Upon applying, I'm going to be awarded a merit scholarship. As I mentioned, 100% of our students are given some form of aid. With that, it means their merit scholarship. All of our students qualify for some form of a merit scholarship. It requires them to be enrolled for 12 credits or more per each semester, so they have to maintain full-time enrollment. And the amount is based on a student's GPA. So 2 years ago, we went test optional. We do not require the SATs or ACTs. Their merit amount is determined strictly on their GPA. As I mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about the direct cost of education. So these are the figures that institutions use to prepare what's known as the financial aid package using the following formula. We take again, that direct cost at the institution. We minus that EFC number, which we're getting from the FAFSA, and that's how we determine a student's demonstrated need. We take that need, we deduct any federal aid eligibility, so any Pell Grant, any SEOG. Then we move on to the state side, any TAP eligibility, and then we deduct any merit-based scholarship that a student has been awarded, and we award any additional aid that a student may be eligible for, any additional what's called grant and aid or need-based aid, and we deduct that, and that's how we come up with a student or family's out-of-pocket expense. I keep saying the financial aid package, so it's important to know these are all made up of grants, scholarships, loans, and typically work study is included in it. The package is always based on a family's financial strength. Again, that's determined by filing the FAFSA and delivering that EFC to every institution. Most packages include loans. That is super important to understand. As you're getting these award offers from every institution, it's extremely important to break it down. What is, what's free money? What's a loan? So never look at just the bottom line number. What if the financial aid package is not enough? So we talked a little bit about the Federal Parent Plus loan. There are what's called alternative loans, which are in the student's name, and they usually always require a student to have a credit-worthy cosigner, and we encourage students to go with a credit-worthy cosigner to lock in a lower interest rate. And then there's always a payment plan with the institution. Every institution usually has some sort of a tuition payment plan. They usually stretch out over the course of 10 months, but notice what I bolded and put in red here. These are interest-free. So I always counsel the family, sit down as a family and figure out realistically what you can come out of pocket every month. Enroll in that payment plan, which you're not paying interest on. Enroll for that amount, even if it's $50 a month, $100 a month. And then if there's still a balance due thereafter, then borrow a loan, because obviously the loans are accruing interest. I'm just going to quickly touch on the CSS profile. This is another application that about 400 colleges use to determine how they will award their institutional funds. More of the Ivy or more elite schools will require both the profile and the FAFSA. This form is also available October 1st each year, but it collects much more comprehensive income. It goes way into detail. They want to know your home value, your retirement value. They'll ask for a non-custodial parent form. They pretty much want everything but your blood type. So they dig a lot deeper. And the difference between the FAFSA and this, another difference is that it does cost money. This comes with a price tag of about $25. And every college that it must get sent to, it's a charge of $16. Special circumstances. This is anything that cannot be reported on the FAFSA. I highly encourage families to write an explanation to each financial aid office at every institution listed on the FAFSA. If there's been a change of employment status, if there's been a change in a parent's marital status, if there are medical expenses that are not covered by insurance, or any unusual dependent care expenses. Let's take this year for an example. COVID hit pretty hard. I'm seeing it on a daily basis. I'm getting appeals left and right. You know, my mom lost her job or dad lost her job. That is, we want to hear that. What we do is it comes down to documentation. We'll request certain forms of documentation to support what your written request is, so that we basically will go into the federal system and manipulate the data for that tax year so that it shows a truer picture of where you are financially. These are some private scholarship search engines. I always say, you know, have the students just take some time out to go out there and see what additional aid is out there. And some helpful web resources. The FAFSA tutorial is great, especially for somebody that has never gone through the process. So just to recap, I know it's a lot of information. I think it's extremely important to understand you need to be proactive. October to February, review deadlines at every institution. So for example, Dominican only requires the FAFSA. We will not ask for the CSS profile. Again, from prior experience, I worked at a private university that required both. And unfortunately, at the time, some families realized both were required. They missed the boat on institutional aid because, again, it was awarded on a first come, first served basis. So I can't stress the importance of searching out each college and institution, understanding what their application process is, what their priority deadline dates are, and making sure that you're meeting them all as best as possible. November to May, schools will begin to send what's called the award letters, the financial aid packages. And then typically June or July, they'll send out the fall semester bill, which will most likely follow up with a due date of August. I know it's a lot of information. If I can help in any way, questions are more than welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna check the chat here. I know a few questions came up. I think some of them may have been answered along the way. One comes up that says, what is the general order? Do you apply to college and then apply for financial aid? Do you apply for financial aid and then apply to the college, or do they happen simultaneously?
So that's a great question. And actually, I always encourage families, if a student is intending on applying to a college, list them on the FAFSA. So start the FAFSA and/or CSS profile, list whatever institutions your son or daughter has applied to. Don't wait for that decision from the admissions office to then add them on the FAFSA. Again, even though we're in an electronic arena nowadays with the filing of the FAFSA and the profile and the acceptance process, it's still going to take time to go back into the FAFSA and add a school after waiting for an acceptance letter. So it's better to list them so that way the minute they're accepted, they're getting into that packaging funnel.
Thank you. Are both parents required to have FSA IDs?
One parent.
Thank you. I think we touched on this when circumstances change in one of your last slides.
It just usually a written letter backed up by documentation. And it is important to know that every institution is going to have their own requirements on what they need to do what we refer to as a professional judgment. So we use our expertise to manipulate the data.
And then is TAP only for New York State?
That is correct.
Okay. And then on the CSS profile, do you have a sense of what other family contributions, what assets they're looking for? Is it, salary, pension income? Does equity in homes count, investments?
It's home value, it's home equity. I mean, they dig deep, and especially in an unmarried or divorced situation, they will want information on the non-custodial parent, their income. I mean, they definitely dive in deeper.
When do financial aid packages usually come out? In the general timeline for when they'll get an award letter? Okay,
so as I had listed on the slide, it's typically November to May. So it's going to vary by each institution. It's important to know that, again, for those that are new to the process, the earliest in the past that a student can file was January 1st. And about, I want to say 3 to 4 years ago, the feds backed it up to October 1st. Some schools have jumped on board with that and have started the process even earlier. So I can refer to Dominican again. We like to have our award letters out by Thanksgiving. Again, it's going to vary by every institution, but you can expect it anywhere as long as all the requirements have been met anywhere between November and May.
Thank you. I can answer this one. We are recording this presentation and we will post it to the TZHS Counseling Facebook channel. Not Facebook channel. I messed that one up now, Cal.
I know.
It's
Now
a
you're
YouTube
a
channel.
YouTube channel.
YouTube channel, Facebook channel. We're on all the social media now.
Not on Twitter.
Oh yeah, not on Twitter.
No.
What happens if a student changes their mind mid-year and goes to a different school? So in a transfer student situation.
Okay, so a transfer student, as I mentioned, making a correction to the FAFSA to take schools off if you're applying to more than 10 and adding additional schools, that's what would happen. You would go into the transaction that was processed, the most recent one that was processed, and you would add that school that the student is transferring to.
Do we apply, I think we answered this, do we apply first to college and then complete the FAFSA, or both at the same time? I think we just did that one. I know one question on FAFSA is how much money is in the checking account of the student. Are they penalized if they have a good amount of money in their checking account from working? Will they get less aid?
Okay, so I will say this, I am being recorded, but I will say student investments and assets weigh heavier into the EFC than that of the parents. So take that information and use it wisely.
Thank you. It was said earlier that only the custodial parent's income financial assets would be required for the application. Please clarify. I think that's the difference between FAFSA and CSS profile.
Yeah, so the FAFSA will only ask for the custodial parent's information. The CSS profile will ask for the non-custodial parents, all their information, their address, their income, their assets, everything.
Would you say, are there circumstances where that a student might obtain something called a non-custodial parent waiver?
Yes, that is true.
And that would be, extenuating circumstances where maybe there wasn't a relationship with that non-custodial.
And that's correct.
Okay. If parents are divorced, are both incomes reported, or is just the income of the parent claiming the student on their tax returns?
Okay, that's a great question because, as I mentioned, it's only the custodial parent that gets listed on the FAFSA, right? The custodial parent, the definition, as I mentioned, is the parent the student is residing with. The tax returns mean absolutely nothing. So in a divorce situation, mom may claim, her daughter this year, dad will claim her next year. The only parent that is required on the FAFSA is the parent the student's residing with.
Thank you. And then 529 plans. This question comes up often. Do they have to be included on the FAFSA?
So they do fall into they'll ask for investments. They are considered an investment. What I always say to that is, again, if it's in the student's name, it's going to weigh heavier into the EFC. I always say, maybe it can get into grandma or grandpa's name.
Can you please answer again, do I have to complete the Common App and apply to schools before I fill out FAFSA?
You don't have to, and I actually would suggest that, especially since today you can go in and start the FAFSA today. You can go in and do the profile. It doesn't hurt to start the financial aid process simultaneously with the application process.
Perfect. Thank you. And then this one's for us. The YouTube channel, all of the TZHS Counseling social media is that name, TZHS Counseling. And so you can go to YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and search us. And like us. And follow us.
Is that all we got, James?
I think so. I think we're getting to the end.
Oh.
Aw. Thanks.
I think it's great that this actually is taped, because even as I was listening, and I'm quite a few years away from the college process with my children, it's so much information. So I actually kind of think this format of being taped is maybe even better. So you can kind of go back and, you know, remember little bits and pieces of it and watch it again. So I think this format will actually help people more, you know, going forward.
And Stacey, correct me if I'm wrong, when we talk to, you know, admissions counselors, they often share with us that financial aid representatives in the financial aid offices are very open to talking with families of prospective students.
Oh, 110%. 110%. There's always, and I can speak to that of Dominican College, like during the open houses, you know, once you step foot on the campus, accepted student day, it's a very personal touch. We sit down, we'll get to that bottom line number for a family when they're really close to making a decision. But it's not even only at events, at any time. We have a walk-in basis, and well, now with COVID, there is no walk-in basis, but typically you can walk in or call us at any time. And I always say, questions that may arise or come to any of you, I'm more than happy to assist.
Oh, thanks so much. Thank you. Okay, I think that is our presentation for this evening, and we thank everybody for attending tonight. And again, as Kelly said, you can watch this presentation again, and you can please reach out to us with any questions that might come up as you're trying to navigate this process. And if we don't have the answers, we'll reach out to people who might. Stacey.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. We really
Thank you. Thank you, Stacey.
You.
All right. Good night.
Good night, all.